Room 34. On their immediate right, between the outer and inner doors, was the desk for the concierge, and a French-looking attendant, dressed in the same livery as the limping man at the train station, was sitting by the telephone reading newspapers. He came up to them and led them across the well-lit lobby, with public rooms leading off it on the left. Hans Castorp peered in as they passed, and discovered them empty. "Where were the guests?" he asked, and his cousin replied, "Taking their rest cure. I was excused from it today because I wanted to meet your train. Otherwise I'd be lying out on my balcony after my evening meal too." It would not have taken much for Hans Castorp to be seized by another fit of laughter. "What? You lie out on your balcony, rain or shine, night or day?" he asked, his voice wavering on the edge. "Yes, it's in the rules, from 8 till 10. But come on, let's have a look at your room and you can wash up." They got on the elevator, the Frenchman operating the electric switches. As they glided upward, Hans Castorp dried his eyes. "I'm exhausted, I've laughed so hard," he said, catching his breath through his mouth. "It's all these crazy things you've been telling me. The psychic dissection was just too much. I could have done without that. Besides, I'm a little weary from the trip, I suppose. Do your feet get cold so easily, too, and at the same time your face flushes? It's an unpleasant feeling. I assume we'll be eating soon. I think I'm getting hungry. Do they feed you properly up here?" They passed soundlessly down the coconut runners of the narrow corridor. Cool light came from the milk glass shades of lamps set in the ceiling. The walls were painted with a hard, glistening white enamel. A nurse in a white cap appeared from somewhere, a pince-nez set on her nose, its cord tucked behind one ear. She had the look of a Protestant nurse, of someone with no real devotion to her profession, but kept restless by curiosity and the burden of boredom. Some balloon-shaped objects had been set out in the corridor, beside two of the white enameled doors, large pot-bellied containers with short necks. Hans Castorp was going to ask their purpose, and just as quickly forgot the question. "Here you are," Joachim said. "Number 34. I'm on your right, and on your left is a Russian couple. They're rather slovenly and loud, I must say, but there was nothing else we could do." "Well, what do you say?" There was a double door, with clothes hooks in the space between the two. Joachim had turned on the ceiling light, and its sharp luster revealed a room that was both cheerful and restful, with white, practical furniture, heavy, washable wallpaper, likewise white, a floor covered with spotless linoleum, and linen curtains embroidered with a simple, cheerful pattern of modern design. The door to the balcony stood open to a glimpse of lights in the valley and the sound of distant dance music. Joachim had thoughtfully placed a few wildflowers in a small vase on the dresser, some yarrow and a couple of bluebells in their second bloom this summer, that he had picked on the slopes. "How kind of you," Hans Castorp said. "What a nice room. I'll have no trouble putting up here for a week or two." "An American woman died here the day before yesterday," Joachim said. "Behrens told me he was sure it would all be over before you arrived, and that you could have the room. Her fiancé was with her, an English naval officer, but he didn't exactly keep a stiff upper lip. He kept coming out into the corridor to cry every few minutes, like a little boy. And then he'd rub his cheeks with cold cream because he'd just shaved and the tears stung. Evening before last, the American woman had 2 first-class hemorrhages, and that was that. But she's been gone since yesterday morning, and of course it was all thoroughly fumigated with formalin. They say it's very effective, you know." Hans Castorp was listening to this narrative with edgy bemusement. He had rolled up his sleeves and was standing now at the large wash basin, its nickel taps sparkling under the electric light, but he cast no more than a fleeting glance at the bed's white metal frame and fresh sheets. "Fumigated, that's spiffing," he said glibly, and somewhat incongruously, while he washed and dried his hands. "Yes, methylaldehyde. Even the toughest bacteria can't take that. H2CO. But it does burn in your nose, doesn't it? It's obvious, of course, that strict cleanliness is essential." His accent, particularly his st, betrayed his Hamburg origins, whereas starting back in his student days, his cousin had adopted more standard pronunciation. Feeling much chattier now, he rambled on. What I was going to say was, that naval officer probably used a safety razor. That's what I think. It's easier to cut yourself with those than with a well-stropped straight razor. That's been my experience, at least. So I alternate between the two. And of course, salt water does smart on chafed skin. So he probably got in the habit of using cold cream while he was in the service. That doesn't seem at all peculiar to me. And he chatted away, telling about how he had packed 200 Maria Mancinis, his cigars, in his trunk, but that getting through customs had been easy as pie. And then he extended greetings from various people back home. "They don't heat the rooms?" he suddenly exclaimed, and ran over to put his hand on the radiator. "No, they keep it rather cool," Joachim answered. "The weather would have to turn really bad before they would turn on the heat in August." August, Hans Castorp said. "But I'm freezing. I'm absolutely freezing. I mean, my body is, although my face feels awfully flushed. Here, feel it, it's burning up." The suggestion that someone feel his face was not at all typical of Hans Castorp, and even he was embarrassed by it. Joachim did not acknowledge it, but merely said, "It's the air here. It doesn't mean anything. Behrens himself walks around with purple cheeks all day. Some people never get used to it." "Well, come on now, or we'll not get anything to eat." In the corridor, they ran into the nurse again, who squinted with nearsighted curiosity as she watched them pass. They had reached the second floor, when Hans Castorp suddenly stopped in his tracks, mesmerized by a perfectly ghastly noise he heard coming from behind a dog-leg in the hall. Not a loud noise, but so decidedly repulsive that Hans Castorp grimaced and stared a wide-eyed stare at his cousin. It was a cough, apparently. A man's cough, but a cough unlike any that Hans Castorp had ever heard. Indeed, compared to it, all other coughs with which he was familiar had been splendid, healthy expressions of life. A cough devoid of any zest for life or love, which didn't come in spasms, but sounded as if someone were stirring feebly in a terrible mush of decomposing organic material. "Yes," Joachim said, "it looks bad. An Austrian aristocrat, you know, an elegant fellow, your born horseman. And now it's come to this, although he's still up and about." As they walked on, Hans Castorp remarked, referring to the horseman's cough, "You must realize that I've never heard anything like it, that it's all quite new to me, and that it does make an impression. There are so many kinds of coughs. Dry ones, loose ones, and loose ones are healthier, people say, better than dry barks. Back in my youth," he actually said, "in my youth, I caught the croup and it had me barking like a wolf, and everybody was happy when it loosened up. I still remember it quite well. But a cough like that, that's something new, to me at least. It's not even human. It's not dry, but you can't call it loose either. There's no word for it. It's as if you were looking right down inside and could see it all, the mucus and the slime." "Well," Joachim said, "I hear it every day, so you don't need to describe it for me." But Hans Castorp could not get the cough he had heard out of his mind, and he kept repeating that it was literally like looking down inside the horseman. And as they entered the restaurant, his eyes, weary from the trip, had taken on a glint of nervous excitement.